With the Fallout Amazon series right around the corner, and people asking my thoughts on it in my stream chat, I figure I'd give my impression of what we know so far based on interviews, articles, and the footage they've released. The short version, as you can tell from the title of this video, is simply that I do not think this show is going to be any good. I think it's going to continue Bethesda's trend of shitting on established lore and over-focusing on the wacky and weird aspects, with any actual serious storytelling being shallow and contradictory. Now, it is true that the people writing the show are not the people who made the games, but their primary source of information for the Fallout franchise is Bethesda, who again, have made massive retcons and have heavily damaged the lore of this world since their acquisition of the IP. The showrunners have a handicap from the start. Their primary source is rotten. It's like trying to fix a complex machine with rough notes and forgotten details scribbled on a napkin. I do have to acknowledge that the show may turn out to be good against all odds, but I do feel the chances of that are so slim it's not even worth considering. If I'm wrong, then I'm wrong, and I'll admit as such. However, currently, I have every reason to believe that this show is going to be a complete dumpster fire, and as a quick reminder, the last time I was this skeptical about a piece of media, it was Starfield, which I got a lot of flack for on Twitter before its release. For the record,
fuck you, I was right, fuck you, I was right, fuck you, I was right!
With that out of the way, let's get into this. Most of this video will be off the cuff, as I'm mostly just following notes to keep myself on track. First up is an article from 2021, about 2.5 years ago. I think this is the first article that gives any kind of detail about the show, but I'm not entirely sure. I didn't do a deep and extensive search, but this is one that I did read on stream back in the day. The main reason I'm looking at this article, aside from the fact that some of the first information we had about the show, is one comment from the showrunners in particular. It is just a gonzo, crazy, funny adventure and a mindfuck like none you've ever seen before. This already gives me a really bad impression because part of the problem with Bethesda Fallout is that they lean hard into the jokey, wacky, and weird aspect of the Fallout franchise, which is not what Fallout is about. The original Fallout was a really dark and grim game. The humor aspect was a very small part of the game. The main problem with this is that Fallout 2 took it to new levels with frequent references to Monty Python and stuff like Doctor Who and Star Trek, which were just really unnecessary and distracting from the game. It's arguably the worst part of Fallout 2 is all the pop culture references and silly jokes they have, because it undermines the tone of the setting, which again is supposed to be very dark. Fallout 2 is personally my favorite Fallout game in the entire franchise, and I believe the humor aspect is absolutely the worst part of Fallout 2. The fact that the show seems to be leaning heavily into that direction is just a massive red flag for me right from the start. It's also worth mentioning that these showrunners worked on Westworld, and while I haven't seen this show myself, I've heard a lot of people say that the first season was good, but it fell off hard after that apparently. In November of 2023, we get the first look at the Fallout show from Vanity Fair. I'm not going to go over this entire article, I'm just picking some key points that stand out to me. The first is a comment from Jonathan Nolan himself. The games are about the culture of division and haves and have-nots that, unfortunately, have only gotten more and more acute in this country and around the world over the last decades, Nolan tells Vanity Fair. It is kind of shocking that he's getting this so wrong, and it feels like modern politics are being shoved in. To summarize the stories of each of the mainline Fallout games very quickly, simply, they're not about the haves and have-nots. Fallout 1 is largely about two things. The water purifier chip in your vault has been broken, and you need to go and find a new one, so the vault can continue to live. The other half of the main story in Fallout 1 focuses on the Master Super Mutant Army, who he plans on converting all pure humans into super mutants, and you need to stop him. There's nothing in there about the haves and have-nots. Similarly, in Fallout 2, you have to find the Gek, a piece of equipment that will allow people to essentially start rebuilding society, and you're looking for this in order to save your village. Throughout the story, you find out about the Enclave, the remnants of the US government, who seek to exterminate all mutated life on the planet. And they plan to do so by putting a poison into the air that will only affect the mutants, which at this point consists of regular people living on the surface, so you and your entire town. Again, it's not about the haves and have-nots, it's a genocidal plot to kill all of the unclean, essentially. In Fallout 3, the main story is about a water purifier and getting it up and running to give fresh water to the wasteland. Again, the Enclave's involved, but there's nothing in there about the haves and have-nots in that sense for the main story. The game does kinda touch on that a little bit, but it's very mixed. Fallout New Vegas, once again, isn't focused on the haves and have-nots. It's a war for control of this piece of land, essentially, with 3, technically 4 different factions vying for control. Fallout 4, again, has 4 factions, but once again, it's not about the haves and have-nots. It's about a group of evil super scientists who are replacing people with robots, and the story is really poorly written, so it's kind of hard to summarize. But in short, it's not about haves and have-nots, so saying that these games are about haves and have-nots is just really, really fucking weird and out of touch. This article also mentions that we're getting the origin story for Vault Boy, which... fucking why? Not everything has to have a fucking origin story, just leave it alone. One of the most important details, though, is the fact that Todd Howard considers the show canon to the games. This is important because any criticism or analysis of this show is going to have to take the games and their events into account when criticizing this show. So, this is more potential for retconning established lore. This is more potential for contradicting previous games or ruining certain aspects of the lore, which Bethesda's not afraid to do. In fact, I find it particularly amusing that they specifically point out that Bethesda was careful to make sure the scripts could coexist with previous storylines from the gaming titles, which is kind of insane to me, considering Bethesda doesn't even make sure their own scripts are consistent with themselves, let alone with their other Fallout games, let alone with the rest of the series. Just as a reminder, in Fallout 4, the game seems to flip-flop on whether ghouls need food and water or not. You have Kid in a Fridge, who has been stuck inside a fridge for 210 years without food and water. You have the settlement building system, of which ghouls have a food and water requirement. Then you have Eddie Winter, who is locked in a small bunker in a fucking train station, again, for 210 years, without enough food and water to last him that long. Finally, you have Kent Connolly, who is specifically mentioned as needing food and water on a terminal log. And this is just in one game, the latest mainline Fallout game by Bethesda. This isn't counting the fact that in Fallout 3 there's ghouls who will fight over water. This doesn't count the fact that Fallout 1 established that ghouls need water to survive. It's a very big plot point of Fallout 1. You get a bad ending for taking their water chip and not getting them an alternate source of water. So to say that Bethesda is being very careful that the show fits in with the games, yeah, I'm not buying it, sorry. The next segment I want to cover has to do with the Brotherhood of Steel. It's a little bit of the Marine Corps, it's a little bit of the Knights Templar. It's this kind of weird fusion, Nolan says. In the absence of a federal government, you just had all this military hardware lying around. Who would get it, and how would they maintain control of it? The answer is the Brotherhood, which Nolan describes as being fueled by a mutated version of patriotism, religion, loyalty, and fraternity. There is so much fucking wrong with this. What do you mean patriotism? The Brotherhood has never been a patriotic group. If you're just talking about loyalty to their own faction, that's not patriotism. Yes, the Brotherhood is cult-like. They're a group of technophiles. It's treated much like a religion. But patriotic? I genuinely don't know how you get that read from them, ever. Their control comes from the battalions of super soldiers, knights in shining power armor, who stalk the landscape enforcing the Brotherhood's notion of order. So I wouldn't really consider a power-armored soldier to be a super soldier. I view them as two different things. When I think of a super soldier, I'm thinking more like Captain America, someone who's genetically enhanced, or even like the Winter Soldier, someone with cybernetic upgrades, but I wouldn't consider a man in a mech suit, power armor, to be a super soldier. Saying that the Brotherhood enforces their notion of order is really, really weird, because they're not a political group seeking power and control over people. Their whole thing is keeping advanced technology away from the dirty outsiders. They don't care about their petty struggles or conflicts. Another point, and this is a very small one I admit, but in this interview Nolan says whoever the good guys and bad guys were, they destroyed the whole world, so now we're in a more gray area. Which is really weird because there were no good guys or bad guys in the nuclear apocalypse in this series. Both sides were absolutely awful, and while we don't see what happens on the Chinese side of this conflict, on the American side of this conflict, we see the government doing a lot of absolutely horrible things, testing on people. Many of the vaults are experiments which lead to people's deaths. They're largely social experiments that almost always end in disaster and death and tragedy. So describing the war as there being good and bad guys is just really weird. It very much feels like someone who is not aware of what the series is at all. The last thing I want to talk about with this article is how they talk about the Ghoul, who doesn't even get an actual name, he's just called the Ghoul. The article seems to treat him as though he's somehow a unique case, as if ghouls aren't common in this world, which they're very common. It just seems really weird to me that he's getting this strange special treatment when, again, it's just a common thing for ghouls to be in this world. Shortly after that, we got a teaser trailer, and there's not much to comment on, aside from an overall jokey comedy tone that I don't really like, going from brutal fighting to a really weird and out-of-place comedy bit.
I see it with you. I grabbed a moldy one.
Also, why the fuck is the Vault Overseer Cyclops? This, to me, reeks of the kind of thing you'd see in an 80s or 90s adaptation of a video game into a movie, where the people making the adaptation just don't understand the source material, and they just do some weird fucking shit with it. I don't see why this guy should be a Cyclops, and also it just looks fucking terrible. What the hell? In early March, we get the full trailer. For the most part, the production quality looks pretty good, and I don't mind that aspect of the show so far based on what we've seen. That said, there's a few things I do want to talk about here that stand out to me in this trailer. The first one, and this is a really, really big one, we see this shot of two characters at the edge of a crater, and there's a sign there that says Shady Sands Public Library. And this stands out to me in particular because Shady Sands is the capital of the NCR. This is a location from Fallout 1 and 2, and to say it's a major lore location is a bit of an understatement. This is quite possibly one of the most important locations in the world, in the lore at this point. And what I'm seeing here gives me the impression that it's just been fucking destroyed. Now, I suppose it's possible that this sign could just be an Easter egg, but I very much have my doubts. There is no real-world Shady Sands. It's a fictional town made up for the original Fallout. And if it really has been destroyed, if that's what this series is confirming, then I feel like there needs to be a really, really, really good fucking reason for this place to be gone. I just feel this has a lot of really bad implications, and this is just another massive red flag to me. There's also a shot of a crater towards the end of the trailer, and I believe it's supposed to be the same one, which, again, if this is Shady Sands, what the fuck? There better be good justification for this. Another thing that stands out to me is how power armor helmets now open like an Iron Man face mask, and I just really don't like this. The power armor helmet has been shown to be solid in the past, and this is just totally unnecessary. I don't believe you would ever need this on power armor, where it's meant to protect you, but you could still talk to people, you could still have conversations in full power armor, and people do in this series all the time.
Paladin dance.
You ready to move out?
Ready.
Outstanding. Follow me, and try not to lag behind. Listen up. We do this clean and quiet. No heroics and by the book. Understood?
It feels like they did this just so they don't have to have the character taking off the helmet constantly to show his face. It also actually kind of reminds me of the Halo show, which is also fucking terrible, but they have Master Chief take off his helmet all the time, and there's even large parts of the show where he's not even in his armor. Another thing that's standing out to me with all this pre-release info is the general lack of the NCR as a whole. Remember that this show is taking place on the West Coast, which is solidly in NCR territory, the New California Republic, for anyone who hasn't played the games. This is a full-on nation rebuilding from the ashes of the old world. They emulate the old world government. And the fact that they're barely getting a mention, the fact that you have to look in the background of one of the shots in these trailers to even see one of their flags, is a really bad sign to me. The NCR should be present everywhere in this part of the world, and they're barely referenced from what I've seen. Again, it's just another really, really big red flag. The final thing I want to talk about, and we've seen a couple pieces relating to this already, but this trailer felt like the biggest showing of it, and it's the whole Junktown aesthetic that's going on, which I believe is out of place for how far into the timeline we are. Remember, this show takes place 220 years after the apocalypse, and people are still cobbling together bits of scrap to build their towns from? I'm sorry, I'm not buying that. It seems as though Bethesda wants this perpetual apocalypse Mad Max aesthetic, which just doesn't make sense with how far we are past the apocalypse in this franchise at this point. Even in Fallout 1, which was about 80 years after the apocalypse, people were rebuilding, they were making new things, they were making new towns, they were creating new weapons. Same goes in Fallout 2, where, again, we see the NCR has grown into its own nation and is expanding, it's gaining territory. But then in Fallout 3, everyone is still living in ruins or cobbled together scrap heaps like Megaton, which just, again, doesn't make sense. It feels like the world is stagnating when it shouldn't. I really, really hate Bethesda's aversion to the world progressing in any way, and just the stagnation of it all, the nonsense of it, I fucking hate. And it really is a big question in Fallout 3 and 4 especially of why is no one making anything new? For the most part. See, most of the Wastelanders are just apparently content to live in these crap shacks and not really do anything to better their lives. Whereas when we do actually get people making new things, they're things that don't make sense for the world. Stuff like the synths, which the synths in and of themselves in Fallout 4 are such a massive contradiction in almost every way. It'd probably extend this video out to a fucking hour to talk about them all. I do cover it in depth in my Fallout 4 analysis. The other big thing made post-war that doesn't make sense is the Pridwin, the Brotherhood's airship, and we see a shot of an identical one in this trailer for the Brotherhood, and this thing is just complete nonsense. It is a magic flying fortress and I hate it. In particular, it's really weird to me that stuff like this was not possible before the war, when you had countries that could gather resource, but after the war it's just suddenly possible now to build multiple airships that double as a massive flying fortress and a tank. This thing is armored. In Fallout 4 they say it weighs about 40,000 tons, and it's apparently held up by fucking hydrogen. Moving on, just a few days ago we also got a statement from Jonathan Nolan saying they didn't set out to please fans. I don't think you can really set out to please fans of anything, the director opined. or please anyone other than yourself. I think you have to come into this trying to make the show that you want to make and trusting that, with us being fans of the game, we would find pieces of that were essential to us and try to do the best version. I've got mixed feelings on this. On one hand, it's a massive red flag for a showrunner to say they're not setting out to please fans, where we've seen examples in the past where other showrunners have said similar things and the end product was complete garbage. That said, he is kind of right here, in the sense that the Fallout fanbase is one of the most divided fanbases right now, aside from maybe Star Wars. It's true that you can't please all fans, but especially so in this case, where there's two very distinct versions of what Fallout is, and the show can't adhere to both of them. You either have the side of Fallout 1, 2, and New Vegas, where there's rich stories and characters, where the world building is really, really good, and you have the Bethesda version, which is more wacky and jokey and just shits all over everything. And when Nolan says that you can't really please anyone other than yourself, that he's a fan of the games too, and they're looking for the parts that are essential, and try to do the best version of that, you have to remember that he's a fan of the Bethesda Fallout. He likes Fallout 3, which again, retcons the lore and shits all over it as well. It just tells me which way this is going to skew. Fallout 1 and 2 might as well be in an entirely different dimension at this point, because Bethesda's Fallout has almost completely supplanted what was originally there with their fucking bastardization garbage. The final thing to talk about is the most recent clip Amazon has released. The first scene video, which is 2 minutes long. I obviously can't play the full thing here, but we get some cringe dialogue from our main character. I get that she's naive, and it kind of makes sense for her to be like this, but it's just not a good first impression, and I think they could have handled this a lot better. Another thing I noticed while recording is this sign saying that they deal in caps only, which, again, we're on the West Coast, why are they dealing in caps still? Caps were the currency of Fallout 1, but by the time of Fallout 2 they had moved on because the NCR was its own faction now, and people were dealing with actual money again. Fallout 3 brought back caps, seemingly for nostalgia reasons, and while New Vegas does deal in caps, it's not in NCR territory. It's territory that they're trying to gain control of. So it makes sense people would be using caps. But we also see the NCR's currency as well as the Legion's currency in New Vegas as well, showing that societies are growing and making their own money again. So why the fuck, in a story that's taking place on the West Coast deep in NCR territory, are they using fucking caps still? Anyways, in this little conflict that's going on here, the Brotherhood intervenes.
Knight Titus of the Brotherhood of Steel, stand down or be cut down.
Why is the voice so shit? This is not what people in Power Armor sounded like. Why is it so bad here? Also, why is the Brotherhood getting involved? They don't give a shit about the petty squabbles of rando wastelanders or even vault dwellers. Again, they're a faction of technophiles. They want to keep advanced technology out of the hands of the dirty simpleton outsiders. That's all they care about. So why are they intervening in this conflict? Also, there's this.
They fly now! They fly now? They fly now!
The flying looks like shit, and Power Armor shouldn't be able to fly. This is a problem I have with Fallout 4 as well, where they introduced a jetpack mod for Power Armor, when again, this is an incredibly heavy suit of armor, and the amount of thrust you need to take off is kind of insane. Power Armor, due to its nature, just should not be able to fly. And the fact that they just do it casually here is a problem for me. It should not be able to fly. It should be too heavy to fly. Power Armor makes you into a walking tank, and the technology to suitably give that walking tank lift just should not be possible in this world. That's basically everything I have to cover right now, and I see a mile-long wide trail of red flags where almost every piece of information that has come out about this show leads me to believe that it's not going to be good, that it's going to continue bastardizing the lore, that it's going to be inaccurate to the original games in New Vegas. I have had people ask me if I think the show is going to intentionally retcon New Vegas, or something like that, and to answer that, no. Bethesda's retcons don't tend to be made out of malice, but out of incompetence. I don't think the show is going to go out of its way to retcon New Vegas, but it might do so incidentally, because I'm seeing a lot of the same problems here as I see with Bethesda Fallout, where they just don't adhere to what was already there. They don't seem to care. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'll have to eat crow on this, but at this point I don't think I will. Hopefully it'll be good. Maybe. I don't want Fallout to be bad. But I have no reason or expectation to believe it will be any good at this point. Everything I've seen points to problem after problem after problem. I will be covering this show, but I don't know what form that's going to take yet. It all depends on how the show actually ends up being by the end. But I suppose we'll see when we get there. But yeah, that's everything I've got for today. If you like this video, please subscribe. I do have several videos in the works, including a Starfield analysis and finishing off my Fallout 4 analysis. This isn't a Bethesda-focused channel though, I do cover other things as well, and I'm working on those videos on the side while I'm working on my larger projects. Thank you for watching.